construction, to nursing, to food processing and hospitality.
Give me, just plates.
Tony Keatis has a chain of 35 restaurants with more than 1,000 staff, half of which are European. He says he's worried about trying to grow a company at a time when good workers are disappearing.
Because we have less people coming through. Recruitment is becoming even more challenging than it used to be. So we don't have as many people coming to apply. We cannot replace people. It's people that cook, it's people that look after you, it's people that smile at you. So for us, it's very, it's a worry.
You can see the stark drop in immigration from the EU with the blue line, showing that numbers have dropped by a quarter since the referendum. In the orange line, you can see not only are there fewer EU citizens coming, but now they are leaving at the fastest rate in 10 years. These two trends mean that overall, net migration has now fallen by 60% since the referendum.
Well, you reduce growth, you reduce the number of people in jobs, you reduce tax revenue, and you reduce how much the economy produces. I think it is very odd that simply because you want fewer immigrants, you would be prepared deliberately to make yourself poorer, to reduce the quality of your public services. But some people appear to think that's what we voted for. Maybe it is.
But have a look at this graph. The blue line shows the fall in EU immigration. But in green, you can see that non-EU immigration has actually increased to levels not seen since 2004. In a way, this is the worst of both worlds. An exodus of workers from key industries, but at the same time a failure to curb immigration, one of Theresa May's cornerstone promises. But David Goodhart, the author who's been critical of free movement, says today's figures are good news.
The problem with EU immigration has been it is so indeterminate, and it's that kind of uncertainty and indeterminacy about EU free movement that I think has made it very unpopular. With people coming from outside the EU, we have much more control over who comes. They come here for a limited period of time on a visa, and then usually after a certain period of time they go home.
Goodhart has little time for company complaints about European workers leaving. He says in the end it's better for the country.
We have given employers a huge free lunch in the last 15 or 20 years, talking about, in Marxian terms, about a kind of reserve army of labour in Eastern and Central Europe.
The question is whether there's an army of British workers at the ready to fill these jobs, or whether we're just hurting the economy and making us all poorer.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Madeleine Sumption, Director of the Migration Observatory. Now, her research focuses on the role of migrants in the labour market. First of all, do we know anything about why the numbers of Europeans has dropped off so much? I mean, are they feeling unwanted, disliked?
We know that there are fewer people coming here for work. It's difficult to unpick exactly why, although it's likely that the exchange rate plays a role, the fact that money earned in the UK is worth less than it was before the referendum. And it's possible that the uncertainty around Brexit and future status of people coming here has had an impact, but it's difficult to unpick.
Because the numbers leaving has gone up as well, and I suppose that might be because the value of the pound.
It could be because of the value of the pound. It could be because economic conditions in many of the main countries of origin have improved over time.
So what does this mean for job vacancies? I mean, presumably, if non-EU migration has gone up, those people who are coming here to work are going into sort of specific jobs from which there are shortages. Is there a straight swap between the non-EU migrants and the EU migrants? Or are they filling different jobs?
The profile of jobs that EU and non-EU migrants fill is slightly different. So non-EU migrants, on average, tend to be in slightly higher skilled positions. Many of the people coming in under the visa system are specifically being sent to very highly skilled
So
jobs.
they are the skilled migrants that the government says it wants?
Many of the non-EU citizens are, yes. And of course, on both sides.
Aren't a lot of them family as well?
Yes, so on the non-EU side, actually the biggest single reason for immigration is international study. And so you have students, a small number of whom enter the labour market, family members, skilled workers. So there's a real mix. I think it's difficult to kind of treat this as just a monolithic category on either side.
But if this trend continues, does that mean we're likely to see shortages of unskilled labour in things like fruit picking and some of those jobs that EU migrants have filled?
It's really difficult, actually, to say what the right amount of immigration is. Now, from employers' perspective, obviously they welcome having larger numbers of people in the labour force. A lot of the research, though, on looking at what are the impacts of this, either for workers or for the economy as a whole, find that the overall economic impacts of migration are actually not as big as many people expect.
I mean, some people think that this will mean wages have to go up to attract people in Britain to those jobs.
Interestingly, the research does not show that immigration has a big impact on wages either way. There are some groups who are affected in the bottom, kind of 10 to 20% of earners, and who could benefit in the short run if there was much lower immigration. But the research really does suggest that the immigration is just not a major factor that's determining how well those people do in the labour market.
But broadly, do you think this is a trend? EU migration going down, non-EU migration going up? Or is it just...
Immigration levels actually fluctuate unpredictably in all sorts of ways. It's very difficult to know. Obviously, the big wild card is policy, what will happen in the future. And if we do have much more restrictive immigration policies to EU citizens, then you would kind of expect to see that trend solidify.
With just a couple of weeks to go before Parliament votes on whether or not to accept the government-backed EU withdrawal bill, Theresa May has accepted the BBC's invitation to a head-to-head Brexit debate with the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. But he's not agreed to it yet, saying he'd rather do it with ITV. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, assesses the day's development.
Brexit split the country and now it's dividing broadcasters. Today, the BBC said Theresa May wants to take part in a debate 2 days before the big Commons vote, suitably for a dancer after the results show of Strictly Come Dancing. Likely audience, 9 million. But Labour think Number 10 and the Beeb are engaged in a cosy stitch-up. Jeremy Corbyn says he is keen to debate, but prefers ITV.
The ITV offer seemed a sensible one. It reaches a wide audience, and the timing looked good to me because it's not inconveniencing people who may wish to watch other things later in the evening. One should always have respect for the viewers.
An ITV debate would precede the final of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Audience around 10 million. Yet both die-hard Brexiteers and Remainers say May and Corbyn aren't the right debaters.
The idea that you have Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, who both have policies that say Brexit has to happen. Jeremy Corbyn, we know, pretty reluctant on the People's Vote, even if that's part of his party's policy. And the People's Vote campaign itself has gone from a standing start to being the most popular outcome in 8 months. And meanwhile, if you're a proper Brexiteer, like a Rees-Mogg or a Johnson, you're excluded as well. So I think the broadcasters really have to look to themselves to see whether this is actually within what they define as their own responsibilities, because I don't.
There needs to be a representative of the two options that currently sit on the table. That is this deal, which I guess should be the Prime Minister, and that is a world trade deal, which is the no-deal situation.
What about a Remainer?
Currently, I think Corbyn is a Remainer, and May was a Remainer.
This morning, Theresa May went to the Commons to be grilled by MPs who chair major committees. Hilary Benn asked whether Downing Street had options ready if MPs reject her deal in a fortnight's time.
Is there any internal planning going on in Number 10?
As I have made clear, my focus is on the vote that will take place in on the 11th of December here in this House.
I think we understand that, Prime Minister.
Yes, but I'm sorry.
But is there any planning going on for that?
What I am focused on and what the government is focused on is the vote that will take place on December the 11th.
When she discussed Britain's future relations with the EU, one MP rather confused her.
We're going to be very good friends and working closely
Friends
together.
with benefits?
Sorry? I missed your quip, I'm sorry.
Friends with benefits, Prime Minister.
She didn't really seem to get the joke.
Right now, there doesn't seem to be any majority in Parliament for any option on Brexit, except against the idea of no deal. Mrs May will continue her tour around the country trying to sell her deal to the people. And yet at the same time, there are also renewed efforts to get the people involved in another referendum, a so-called people's vote.
And three Conservative, former senior ministers argued today MPs could clear up the current Brexit mess with a new referendum, which they say could happen by the end of May.
Personally, I think MPs should take their heads out of the sand, and their duty really is to help navigate Britain through this moment. But I believe that once we do reach that moment of gridlock, then MPs will consider what to do, and clearly a referendum, I think, is the best route through.
With most Tories and many Labour MPs still hostile to the idea, there's probably not now a Commons majority for another referendum. Yet, amid the likely turmoil of the next few weeks, that could well change.
Well, for those wondering what the government's immigration policy might be after Brexit, Mrs May was asked several times at the Liaison Committee today whether she'd publish the immigration white paper, much awaited white paper, before the vote in the Commons in 13 days' time. And several times Mrs May just wouldn't say.